tell you about two different projects that student teams worked on this last semester related to transportation and shipping with the goal of transforming Stockton for cleaner air. I've been teaching this capstone engineering design class for the last several years, and it has been greatly influenced and co-created with different community groups in Stockton. As you can see here, we've been partners in mentoring these student teams as they develop their engineering design projects. And this class, we spent a lot of time thinking big and like creating visions for the future and then seeing what we can do about them. So the idea is, you've probably heard of think globally and act locally. So we start from the global challenges like air quality and climate change. And then we talk about how we're gonna implement changes at the local level, local action, and that's where our partnership with Stockton has come in. And so over the last several years, we've been working to identify areas where we can provide research or data analysis and also like design plans in some sense to think about a future where there's cleaner air and Stockton is able to withstand the climate changes that are coming. And we really view Stockton as a pioneer city, as an AB 617 community, as a TCC grant community, where you're doing such amazing work at the local level, and these ideas can then be taken to the regional level and beyond. So today I'm gonna tell you about two different projects, and just to orient us, let's look at this map of Southwest Stockton. So we have Highway 5 and Highway 4, and most people are familiar with the history that Highway 4 was built in the 1970s, and it destroyed a large part of the Little Manila community, which was the largest settlement of Filipinos outside of the Philippines. And overall, because of various different pollution sources in this area, Southwest Stockton is ranked in the worst 1% for overall pollution burden in California, and in the worst 4% for asthma rates. So we also have the Port of Stockton here, and that's actually the first project that I'm going to talk about, is the student team plan for electrifying the Port of Stockton. And then the second project, which Ari's going to talk about, is the idea of removing the crosstown freeway and looking at the air quality impacts of that proposal. So the Port of Stockton, you can see here in the background, this image shows the Bogstrap community, a historically Black neighborhood in Stockton, which is right next to the port and subject to all of the emissions that come from here. And really all of Stockton is always very interested in what's happening in the port, what's going on with the emissions, what are the trends, are there increases, decreases, what's expanding, how many ships are coming in, and that kind of stuff. So the student team that was looking into this goal of electrifying the Port of Stockton was trying to collect data, like, what's going on, what are the trends, where do we need to go if we want to, reduce emissions from the port by electrifying the onshore operations and also the ships when they come into the port. Because right now, the ships come into the port and their auxiliary engines remain running, so they have to idle when they're at the port during the loading and unloading, and that contributes a large fraction of the emissions from the port. So 70% of the emissions from the port overall are coming from the ocean-going vessels, and the rest is from the land-based loading and unloading and other things like that. So the student team was trying to find data about what are the current emissions, and they found that the Port of Stockton has released two different inventory reports. There was one done in 2018 and one done in 2020, and it takes about 2 years for these to be released. So 2022, that data is still being worked on by the port, has not been released yet. So that's all that's out there. And the students decided that they could get some more information by looking at ship tracking data from satellites. So it's called the AIS ship tracking system, and they wrote some Python code to zoom into this area of Stockton and keep track of how many ships are entering and leaving this area, and also how long they're staying at the port. So based on those calculations, like the hours that they're staying in this box and some assumptions about maneuvering that are consistent with what's done in the ports analysis, the students were able to reproduce the data from 2018 and 2020. So that gave them confidence in their algorithm that they had based on the ship tracking data. And so because the ship tracking data is available every year, the students were then able to fill in the other missing years. And this plot is showing PM 2.5 emissions in tons from the ocean-going vessels. So if you add in the other years based on the ship tracking data, this is what it shows. You can see that prior to 2020, it was relatively flat, and that 2020 had the lowest emissions. This is likely due to the pandemic and supply chain issues, or a reduced number of ships in that year. But you can see this rebound afterwards, where there were ships that couldn't come in 2020 started coming in 2021, but really it wasn't the number of ships so much that created this big increase in PM 2.5 emissions, but the amount of time the ships were spending at the port. Part of this is because of labor shortages and issues with the loading and unloading process that was taking instead of 3 days, more like 5 days for the ships to be loaded and unloaded at the port. So we see through this analysis a significant increase in the PM 2.5 emissions from the ocean-going vessels at the port. Again, these are 70% of the total emissions from the port are coming from these ocean-going vessels. So this was an attempt through this public data to provide some transparency so that we can have a quicker turnaround about what's going on at the port and not have to wait 2 years to see the outcome of the sort of formal emissions inventory that the port is doing. But this way we can know sooner like what's happening and use that information to make decisions about other operations at the port. And the port is actively electrifying the cargo handling equipment which is used for loading and unloading. So they put significant effort into that, and they're currently exploring a bonnet which would go over the emissions like stack of the ship and contain those emissions, but it would only work for some of the ships that are coming in. So they're looking into that, and then we also are hoping that the port and the community will work together to also look at onshore power for ships that can plug in electrically and really drive that change forward so we can get to zero emissions for the port. So that's what I have to say about the port, and I'm going to transfer it over to Ari, who's going to talk about reducing truck emissions on Stockton's Crosstown Freeway.
Hi, thank you, Tina. Yeah, my name is Ari, and I'll be presenting on reducing truck emissions. So here we can see an image of Stockton in the 1950s and one of Stockton today. As we can see, the freeway physically separates South Stockton from the rest of the city. And not only that, but the freeway contributes a lot of PM 2.5 pollution, which is harmful to respiratory and cardiovascular health. In fact, a 1 unit increase has been linked to a 36% increased chance of suffering a cardiovascular health event, such as a stroke or a heart attack. And this shows that even a small improvement in PM 2.5 pollution can improve health outcomes and save lives. So my team and I wanted to envision what South Stockton's air could look like under 3 future scenarios. The first scenario is the business as usual scenario in which trucks are electrified, and the next 2, which are rerouting and undergrounding, are future scenarios in which the infrastructure of Highway 4 is completely reimagined. So in order to analyze pollutant concentrations, my team and I used a line source dispersion model, which is called C-line, and this model takes in traffic volumes, the coordinates of road segments, and meteorological conditions, and outputs concentration maps such as the one we see here. And for C-line, the darker hues indicate the higher PM 2.5 concentrations. So for our future scenario of truck electrification, our team measured the impact of electrifying half of South Stockton's truck fleet, which is a step towards CARB's goal of a fully electric fleet by 2045. So my team and I created this map, which shows the projected decreases of PM 2.5 concentrations across Stockton. And as we can see from the legend, the more yellow or red an area is, the higher decrease in PM 2.5 that we found. And the maximum decrease we found was about 0.7 micrograms per cubic meter. And we can see that along the freeway, there's not that much decreases. So for our next alternative, we did rerouting the trucks from the Crosstown Freeway and replacing the Crosstown Freeway with a low volume cars only Green Boulevard. So a similar project was done in Oakland with the Mandela Parkway project, and researchers associated this with a 98% decrease in annual average daily traffic volumes. And this led to a 25% decrease in black carbon, which is a subset of PM 2.5. Now, after mapping our C-line analysis once again, we created this map which shows the decreases along the Crosstown Freeway, and we can see that the hotspots are stronger compared to the business as usual scenario. We found a maximum decrease that was higher than the other scenario, which was 2.5, but it's important to note that rerouting the truck traffic to other areas would essentially transfer the pollution burden to other communities. And then for our final alternative, we did undergrounding Highway 4 and replacing it with a green space. And this park would provide residents with a recreational area and also boost Stockton's economy by making it a more attractive tourist destination. Current venting technologies can remove up to 98% of emissions in tunnels, and after creating a similar decrease map, we found similar concentration patterns to our rerouting scenario and a maximum decrease again of about 2.5 micrograms per cubic meter. So my team and I evaluated these three scenarios against a couple criteria. For our first scenario, which was truck electrification, we saw the smallest decrease in PM 2.5, and we also didn't see much added community beautification or economic value. And we also projected that there would be moderate expenses to individuals to purchase the electric trucks, as well as to trucking companies and the government for subsidies. For our rerouting and Green Boulevard alternative, our C-line analysis projected a high concentration decrease, and we also believe that the Green Boulevard would moderately boost community beautification and Stockton's economy, and this infrastructural change would come completely from governmental expenses. And for our final scenario, our C-line analysis projected another high decrease in PM 2.5, and we believe that this future vision would provide the most beautification and added economic value. And although this would have the highest governmental cost, since it costs a lot of money to underground a freeway, my team did prefer this scenario, and this is because we saw this cost as more of an investment to advance restorative justice for the communities that were torn apart by the construction of Highway 4, and as a way to increase green space, tourism, and reduce healthcare costs in Stockton. So although undergrounding an entire highway does sound like a radical idea, there are cities that have done it before, and one well-known example is Boston's Big Dig. And for this project, the Central Artery Highway was undergrounded and replaced by this beautiful Rose Kennedy green space, which we can see here. And so in this way, Boston's Big Dig provides an important inspiration for Stockton to underground its highways too. Thank you.
So we'd love to see how this plays out for Stockton in terms of imagining a future with more green space, less air pollution, reduced emissions, electrification, all of that. And we also are always thinking about how do we connect these local actions to regional and then global changes. So if you want to read more about the projects that the students did this past semester, you can find story maps that they made. These are these interactive websites that have maps and data and text, and written reports from each of the teams here, so you can get the QR code, or it's this tinyurl.com 2024 Stockton, and you'll get to the website that has all of the story maps, and we're happy to take questions. Any questions? I can't see because you're all too small.
I have a lot of questions, but I don't know that. I'm curious, so I'm just curious how you pick the projects for the capstone, so it's not as much as like the content base, which is awesome. But how do you pick the projects to design that students are geared toward, and then figure out, like, how do you get the data? And how do you pick your partners?
Yeah, great question. So all the different community partners that we have, we meet with them regularly and ask, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about now? What do you need help with next? And so we brainstorm like long lists of ideas and iterating on those. What's something the students can actually tackle? What's the first step they can take in that direction? So all of these are, sometimes we build on previous years' projects, like the Port of Stockton, a previous team has looked at the data a couple